I'm going to change our background to green right now, Bill, because we got the guy from Bleeding Green Nation ready to go.
There you go. Let's welcome the man that always has the birds covered. Bleeding Green Nation's Brandon Lee Gowton. BLG, welcome back to Philly Press Box Radio. It's go time.
Yeah, day one of Eagles training camp. Back at it once again. Year 12 for me. Excited.
Yeah, BLG, day one in the books. And the big issue all summer has been, the relationship between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. Both guys spoke today. What did we learn about that relationship?
I think we learned that it's not as simple as, the media is making something of nothing. It's a total fabrication. That's not what they said. Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni did not say everything is a lie. We love each other. Everything's great. I think that's intentional. I don't think they wanted to do that, in part because, maybe that's a little unrealistic. It comes off as a little insincere, not very authentic if they say that. Obviously, they're not going to come out and say they don't like each other as well. So I think they kind of towed the line there. I think I'll give credit to the Eagles PR staff here, who I think, had them certainly prepared for those kind of questions on the first day of training camp, especially after, the what happened at the end of minicamp there and the comments by Jalen Hurts. So I think ultimately Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni, they didn't exacerbate the situation, but I don't think they came out and really showed that everything was a lie and they're totally fine. There's no cracks.
Well, BLG, I don't care if they like each other or not. Is Jalen Hurts going to be a better football player this year than last year? And what's it going to take to do that?
I think Jalen Hurts will be, in part because I think he was a little bit unlucky last year in terms of, you look at some of those turnovers that he had. Those are higher rates than the rest of his career, really. So I think he's due for some positive regression in that sense. We saw that with kind of Dak Prescott, who had, that really interception heavy to a new level he ever had in 2022. And then last year, those numbers predictably came down. So I think some of it is just a matter of, him getting back to the norm for his career a little bit. I also think, it's one training camp practice and he didn't look super crisp in the spring, but on the first day of training camp, Jalen Hurts looked a lot more efficient, a lot more crisp. The offense as a whole, followed suit. So I think, bringing Kellen Moore in here, I think that can obviously make a difference for Jalen Hurts and try to maximize him more than the Eagles were able to last year.
Well, it's because you mentioned Kellen Moore. How will the offense look different this year? Of course, you got Saquon Barkley now in the mix. Will the offense look a lot different, do you think?
I think Saquon is obviously going to be a big part of things here. We also saw on the first day of practice a lot of pre-snap motion, which has been a big talking point, considering the Eagles were towards the bottom of the league in that category, surprisingly so in years past. I also noticed something that really stood out to me on the first day was the Eagles' use of tempo. I thought Jalen Hurts looked really comfortable in that setting, and maybe that's a kind of a way to get him in a rhythm is, get that offense operating fast and have him make quick decisions. Obviously, you want to use Jalen Hurts for his legs and his playmaking ability at times, but sometimes it's nice to kind of just have him play point guard and dump it off and let his talented skill players do the heavy lifting for him. And that's something we saw in the first day of training camp. And he basically didn't have any completions today other than when Devontae Smith had a drop. So that's something that I think Kellen Moore can incorporate at the right times.
Do you know in the offseason, did Jalen and his receivers get together? You know how they have a lot of that goes on around the league, wherever the quarterback lives or whatever, that they all go to his area and practice. Did that happen? I don't recall reading anything about that.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts, he did post some things about that. He was talking about that a little bit today at training camp. I think he's definitely aware of that. He doesn't like to give too many details when people ask about it in the spring practices about what that's going to look like. He kind of just, I think he said he kind of posts about it here and there. But certainly, yeah, that's been he did mention that in today's press conference, and he kind of had a smile with that too. I think that's something he looks forward to, not only building the chemistry on the field as players, but also off the field, personality wise too. And Jalen Hurts has certainly been criticized or questioned for leadership after last year, and I think that's something he is aware of and he is working on.
Brandon, one big difference this year will be the absence of number 62 under center. No Jason Kelsey. So Cam Jurgens steps in. Is he ready, for this assignment? It's not just the fact that he's playing center. Kelsey was such a big guy in the clubhouse, a team leader. So I don't know if he has to be that, but is Jurgens ready for all this?
Impossible shoes to fill, considering how great Jason Kelsey is. And that's not, I'm not trying to slam Cam Jurgens here. That's a testament to how good Jason Kelsey was. I think Cam Jurgens can be realistically as good as you want him to be this year and still not Jason Kelsey, because there's only one Jason Kelsey. So, from everything we've seen in the past, when we've seen limited sample size, obviously, of Cam Jurgens playing center, he looked really good. He looked like he can do it. He has the athleticism, the movement skills. That's obviously crucial. What we've yet to see certainly is how it'll play out from a pre-snap phase. And that's not only just because of Cam Jurgens and what he's going to do in that regard, but also Jalen Hurts has talked about wanting more ownership there and more power and more control at the line of scrimmage. So that relationship will be interesting to see. That's something Jalen touched on today. I think, he talked about collaboration in that regard. So we'll see, just how that goes. Again, the leadership off the field, those kind of things, that's going to be just so hard to replace. And that's something probably Cam Jurgens might be able to earn credit more with over time. But obviously, there's other players in this locker room that will step up. And just for example, AJ Brown was the one breaking down the team huddle today in the first day of practice. And I thought that was significant. And I think he was trying to set a tone with that as one of the leaders, one of the captains on this roster.
Well, with it all said and done, the offense doesn't scare me too much because I think there's so many weapons. I think they're going to be good. Now, the defensive side, that one concerns me a little bit. Do they just even have enough personnel overall to be much better this year than they were last? Because the second half of last year, bad isn't even a good enough way to call it.
Yeah, historic collapse by the
there you go.
Incompetent. Okay. Yeah, just hopeless. I think the realistic vision, for the Eagles hiring Vic Fangio is not about, hey, this is going to be the number one defense in the NFL. And that's not to say they're not going to try. Obviously, anything they get beyond their expectations, great. Absolutely. They'll sign up for that. They'll take that. I think realistically, you're kind of just trying to avoid the defense like they did last year, getting in the way and being such a liability that it just kind of wrecks the team. It wrecks the season. The offense can't overcome that. I think they're hoping that Vic Fangio can, at the very least, make them competent. And I think there's reason to believe, considering his track record, he can, help with that. The talent here, certainly, I think there's enough for him to piece it together where it's not the weakest defense or one of the very weakest defenses in the NFL. I think that's kind of has to be the realistic standard. It's not, again, about them being like the 85 Bears or, the Steel Curtain all of a sudden. That's not what this team, I think, is going to be. But there are some young talents who, if they step up, I think they have special kind of potential or top 10 potential. But I think more realistically, you're looking at a good defense, a solid defense, than an amazing defense.
Well, just like Kelsey leaving on offense, we lost Fletcher Cox on defense. And I think it's going to be huge for both Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter to show that they are the real deal on that D-line. Do you agree?
I mean, the coaching staff, Vic Fangio, Clint Hurt, the Eagles defensive line coach, they've really set the table for, hey, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, not only do they need to step up in terms of their level of play and their quality, and certainly we've seen, more highs from Jalen Carter than we have Jordan Davis to this point. You're also going to need to play a lot. They've really emphasized that the snaps are going to go up, and they're going to need to be able to handle that role. And that's one thing the Eagles have had for years here with Fletcher Cox. Was not only, was he a good player, obviously, a really good player, certainly too at his peak, but he was basically always out there. He was incredibly durable for the most part. And, he was leading the Eagles in snaps played. So, the page turns here to especially Jalen Carter to kind of pick up the torch there and keep it going. So, not only, again, are they going to need to play better, but they're also going to need to play longer. And that's taxing and that's challenging. And really the Eagles organizational ethos, I think, has been that, they want to rotate their defensive linemen. But when you look at Vic Fangio's history, he kind of likes to lean on his starters a lot more. So I think the Eagles are also going to have to strike a balance between those two things.
What do you see them? Do you see them being in a 4-man front, and do they have 3 linebackers, or do you see them needing 2 linebackers? And are those linebackers good enough?
That's the perpetual question, isn't it, for the Eagles?
Right.
I'll answer often no, other than your few exceptions here, including in 2022 when they went to the Super Bowl and had T.J. Edwards and Kaiser White. But I think we're going to see a lot of 2 linebackers early on in training camp, and then this is also matches with what we saw in OTAs and minicamp. It is Devin White, who is coming off of a season where he was benched in the playoff game that he last played in when the Buccaneers were in Detroit to play the Lions, and he didn't play too much at all. I think Devin White has looked good so far early on, and he was injured last year. Maybe being healthier will make a difference for him. But again, he's coming off the season he did, and the Bucs certainly, who drafted him high, weren't dying to keep him by any means. There's some red flags there. And then it looks like it'll be Zach Bond, starting next to him. Nakobe Dean is still a factor here, but Zach Bond has been the first guy up in some of these practices. And that's a kind of a question mark, considering he himself talked about maybe playing more edge when he signed with the Eagles, and that's something that he kind of seemed to excel more at with the Saints when he was kind of getting after the quarterback, as opposed to being an off-ball linebacker. So there's kind of a tweener thing going on here. But again, from early on, I've seen some athleticism to Zach Bond. He actually had a really nice pass breakup today on a pass up the seam by Kenny Pickett, intended for CJ Uzama, that Zach Bond was able to knock down. So there is some athleticism there. That's good to see. But, those guys have a lot to prove still.
Yeah, the early reports, like from the OTAs especially, they really seem to like Zach Bond. So hopefully he will be the real deal. Nakobe Dean, coming off, an injury-filled season last year, a lot of pressure on him. Some people question whether he's even going to make the team. Will Nakobe Dean be on the roster in September, and will he play a lot?
Yeah, so I think the key thing to note here is that, when you look at any NFL organization, but we'll specifically talk about the Eagles here, not everyone is necessarily pulling in the same direction or is always on the same page. And by that, I mean that I still think the front office, Howie Roseman, and that side of things, they drafted Nakobe Dean in the 3rd round. They have high hopes for him. I still think that's true, but I think they're not necessarily on the same page as Vic Fangio and the coaching staff, the new linebackers coach there, Bobby King, who do not have that loyalty to Nakobe Dean and are more inclined to just play the best guy that they think is suitable for the job. So ultimately, I think Nakobe's on this roster because I don't think Howie is going to cut him, but I do think the coaching staff is going to lean, unless things change in a significant way, towards Bond and White, who are obviously more experienced players. And I think Nakobe's going to have to find a way to make his way on the field. And I don't feel amazing about that, just because obviously there's the injury history with Nakobe Dean. But even when he has been healthy, I just don't think he's shown enough.
Well, Brandon, you study the Eagles every day. Now 2024 is getting ready to start. Have you been able to, in your mind, conclude what happened in the second half of 2023 and why that collapse happened? Coaching, personnel, where do you see it, and have they been able to correct it, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a little less mysterious than we typically think of it sometimes. Like, how did this possibly happen? We saw warning signs to some extent with they were playing over their heads a little bit. They were bound to come back to earth. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they were bound to fall apart like they absolutely did, but they panicked when they didn't need to. They had that tough stretch against the 49ers and the Cowboys. That was in a really tough part of the season where they're banged up. They're coming off game. They had played that Bills game in overtime. They had some extremely high snap counts in a lot of those games. The defense was just on the field all game long. I think they were exhausted. They obviously made a nonsensical defensive coordinator change that just no one was calling for, in terms of Matt Patricia being the solution to the Eagles season. That's just pretty ridiculous. So they botched it. They panicked when they didn't need to panic. They regressed from playing over their heads earlier in the year. Typically people, talk about how in the NFL, 1-score games can kind of be a coin flip, and eventually your luck in those is kind of going to even out. And we also saw that with the Vikings last year, who fell off after the year prior when they were winning all those 1-score games. So I think ultimately, the bottom dropped out. Obviously the culture was not good, strong enough too, which is a big concern, especially when it comes to Nick Sirianni and his purported strengths. So, there was a lot of things that went wrong. I think it's fair to still talk about this because it shouldn't be as simple as, well, the season ended, so now everything is fine. And they make roster moves and now everything is fine. Like, they have to go out there and prove it again. If the Eagles come out this season, and start the season slow, that's going to be a huge red flag.
So, Brandon, it's July 24th. As I put the schedule up, what is your way too early prediction? How many wins, how many losses for the Birds this year?
Yeah, so, I do think there's downside here when we talk about the collapse and everything and the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni relationship not necessarily being on the up and up and everything. But I come back to, I like this team's talent, especially on offense. I think they just have too much talent. Even when things were not great last year and they fired Brian Johnson and everything, and the offense didn't feel as good as it should have been, and it wasn't as good as it could have been, still a good offense by the numbers just alone from that category. And I think that speaks to the talent they have. So I still feel good about the talent and their schedule. Unlike last year, it's not the easiest schedule in the league, but I think it's pretty favorable for the most part. There's a lot of advantages baked into that schedule, especially more so at least than there are disadvantages. And you combine that with the fact that there just has not been a repeat NFC East winner in 20 years now, that it just feels like, and with the Cowboys not doing anything this offseason, and when you say static in the NFL, as the Eagles should know from last year in terms of not really changing a whole lot on offense, you get worse. So I think the Cowboys are poised to take a step back here. I don't think Dak's going to play as good again, and I think the Eagles are going to rise. I don't really take the Giants that seriously. The Commanders might be a little bit better, but I don't think they're challenging for the division title just yet. So, I like the Eagles to win something like 11 games and, be in position and win the NFC East.
And if things go a little bit off track with that, is Nick Sirianni on a short leash?
I think absolutely. I don't know about, in-season firing, just because we've not seen that really with Jeffrey Lurie, other than, they got rid of Chip Kelly a week before the season ended, which is, essentially over at that point. But, I have a hard time thinking that it could be week 5, I think, is when the Eagles have their bye. And if the Eagles are getting off to a bad start, they'd make the switch then. Like, why would you keep Sirianni around if you're ready to, change that quickly afterwards? But maybe, they do. I mean, I think it's important to consider here that Vic Fangio, is an established head coach, has head coaching experience, as we know. And then you look at Kellen Moore. I mean, that's someone the Eagles interviewed to be their head coach before they ultimately hired Nick Sirianni. And then even the year before that, in 2020, that's someone they were kind of targeting potentially, if they could get a hold of him, to be Doug Peterson's offensive coordinator in his final season there. So, that's someone they like, and maybe they would turn the keys to him if things are really, really bad and out of control. But I think more likely Sirianni finishes the season as the head coach, for better or worse. And then the question is it good enough by then? And I'm going to say, with my prediction, that he does just enough to save his job and return for 2025, but not enough to really necessarily make you feel like, okay, he is definitely our guy and has us on the right track.
2 final things for you, Brandon. Give me 20 seconds on the 76ers. How you feeling about them this offseason with, the addition of Paul George, the draft picks, Embiid playing in Paris this next couple of weeks? What are you thinking?
I think I'm not ready to be excited about them. Like, conceptually right now, if the Sixers win the title next year, obviously I think I can think of myself in June or whenever that happens. Like, I'll be excited then. But that's obviously the very best case scenario. But after watching the Celtics win, I think that just so burned me out on really, like, what's the point anymore, even if we're going to see this happen. So would love to be wrong. I think, again, by the time the season rolls around, maybe I'll feel a little bit different. But right now, at this point in time, I just feel like I can't even enjoy them, especially with the Eagles starting and the Phillies looking pretty good, other than scuffling a little bit lately.
I understand. Hey, BLG, you mentioned this is your 12th year coming up covering the Eagles. It's also your 9th going on 10th year being on our show. Now, I'm not going to ask you to make a speech or anything,
Wow.
but we have to make note of this landmark occasion. First,
That's so good.
25, Brandon.
Thank you for doing that. It's an honor. It's been great talking to you guys all these years.
All right. Well, hey, BLG, before we let you go, so more people can listen to you, tell us where they can follow you on all your social media platforms, things you have going out throughout the season.
Absolutely. bleedinggreennation.com is the hub for all your Eagles content that you need. Certainly incredibly active these days with all our training camp storylines, including my practice observations, which I have a lot of fun doing each day. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Threads and anything at Brandon Gowton, my first and last name there. And then as far as the BGN podcast, who knows? We'll see. Currently not active. I'm trying my best for those who ask about it when it might come back or something. Not in my control. Hoping there's good news sooner than later. But I would say just stay tuned and let's hope that something good happens.
And BLG, I just want to mention, when you were first on with us, it was September 9th of 2015. The Birds starting quarterback was Sam Bradford. Their leading receiver that year was Jordan Matthews. So we go back a ways.
Wow. That's wild.
Thanks, Brandon.
All right, Brandon. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, guys.
All right.